This is a topic that's been weighing on my mind for quite some time. It's rather been a burden to deal with, and I really feel that I need to share this load of crap. Hi, this is Jonathan, and this is NycosRPG. We are going to be talking today on a soapbox about the topic of encumbrance. If you have ever had a situation where your players literally couldn't cross the field because they couldn't remember where they put the axe of the Dwarvish Lords, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. We are talking about what the players carry with them, the term of encumbrance. So if you like the channel, of course, press the button for follow. If you don't, then leave me a comment so I can try to fix things. Either which way, I want to thank you for being here. NycosRPG is a new concept, and we handle encumbrance in a whole new way. But before we even get there, I want to talk about what encumbrance really is and its effect over the evolution of role-playing games. First of all, I have to explain that encumbrance is a name or a term you may not even be aware of if you haven't been a role player for any length of time, because it is simply a subject that is completely ignored, seemingly, by the rules of Dungeons & Dragons today. However, it used to be a major sticking point, and we're going to go into all of that. So here we go. First of all, currently in today's role-playing games, it is almost never brought up. It is what I call heavy on hand-wavium. Sure, go ahead, do what you're doing. I'm not going to worry about it. Not a big deal. If you are a person who is very consistent and very considerate of the rules, one of the major reasons why they have fundamentally erased encumbrance from the definitions of role-playing games and have pretty much ignored this portion of the game is that it fundamentally was the perfect source of raw bait. And yes, raw bait, actually, it's a term, of course, that represents rules as written, not worms that are still crawling. The idea of raw bait here is that by simply talking about the encumbrance, the numeric value of what a person can or can't carry, you are begging for a fight with the people who are stipulators for the specifics. In other words, if a game player happens to be somewhat of a note taker and want to carry, a billion items, they are going to argue the nuanced weight of a tissue paper, because the amount of items that a player might want to bring with them is generally far and away above what they physically can carry, and yet they almost always feel that it's essential. It definitely messes with the players who have perhaps I say it perhaps joking. I say it jokingly, the OCD, but neat freaks just can't deal with it. The idea of tracking every item that you carry and how many of them and what condition they're in. These are all things that just effectively break a game. On the other hand, they are a documenter's dream. A person who is very fascinated with the tracking of items and passage of time and the use of assets. It's perfect. Many times players come from a board games background and are used to the logistics game and tracking how many arrows you have left and how much time since the last change of a lantern. These kind of details are perfect for that kind of player, even though they drive just about everybody else crazy. So, in the recent past, when encumbrance was a thing, that it was fundamentally, it fell out into a bunch of different categories. First of all, it was actually a way for a game master or rules lawyer to throw down the penalty flag and call intentional delay of game, because a player either couldn't go through their materials to determine what they had with them and what they could not carry. They hadn't really considered whether or not the items they list on their character sheet is what they actually have in their backpack, or whether it is a overall list of all of their assets. And so they sometimes confuse the two, and it can cause major problems in the flow of a game. But it's also sort of like a labyrinthine test. If you've watched Jennifer Connelly's movie with David Bowie, The Labyrinth, there is an entire section of that movie dedicated. It's made in a campy way. They're talking about her belongings, the character's belongings, in terms of how she's growing up and she doesn't need to carry with her these burdens of her childhood. But it actually it plays out specifically because the woman who is carrying all of these items is incredibly overburdened. The very idea of carrying all the stuff that is on your persona list, it can get to the ludicrous. I'm going to confuse these things too. This is the reason why henchmen came to exist. If you are familiar with the old Nodwick cartoon, and the comic from Roleplay Games products, the concept of Nodwick was he was a overburdened individual who just was the henchman and carried everything that the quote master would need. And even with that, his persona, this Nodwick character, was constantly, stacked 3 miles high over his shoulder, and it was just ludicrous what all he could carry. And it was a very common trope, very common joke to say that was why you had your henchman, was to carry your bevy of things. Historically, this was perhaps true. If you were going into, for example, the idea of a safari, you would perhaps hire a bunch of porters to carry your belongings. And literally, even then, you would have the same kind of challenge with determining what you would carry and what you would get rid of, because those items were themselves becoming a boat anchor, and the cost of travel was dependent upon how much you could afford in terms of personnel to carry all your stuff. So the idea that a henchman exists merely to carry your stuff is not far off. But ironically, I would consider the discussions of belongings to be possibly one of the top 10 player conflicts that occur in the game. Inevitably, there is somebody who does consider and think about what they're carrying. Sometimes it's the game master who decides he wants to put an additional burden on his players, no pun intended, or actually pun intended, I always intend the puns, the idea of putting upon them the burden of thinking about what they're carrying, and then you spend the next hour as the players start convincing about which of the items they are really carrying that's absolutely essential, and which of the items they're carrying they could possibly part with, and then discussing whether or not they want to wait around to sell the items, or whether they are going to share the load and spread the items across multiple people, and if so, then what's the duty and obligation, and whether or not it's they have to rent the space on somebody's backpack, and blah blah blah. But if you just want to have a fun afternoon with your group after running a campaign for 2 or 3 years, ask them to justify everything that they're carrying and where on their person they are carrying it, and it's a hoot. It's a thrill to hear how they think through things. But what it comes down to, though, is that the concept of encumbrance is the game master's peccadillo. It's not a player's peccadillo, because to the players, their stuff is their comfort food. They can survive anything if they can make it back to their camp at the end of the night and have a cup of coffee from the coffee grounds that they carried from the last city where they bought the coffee in the 50-pound bag, and have been carrying that in their backpack right on top of the package of eggs. So the idea of Encumbrance is essential from the standpoint of running a game that seems realistic, but it's also very much the purview of the rules as written folk. Rules of cool people generally won't even ask. You're carrying that item? Okay, you can have it. But if you want a great turn of events, make them have to cross a ship and can't carry more than 50 pounds of stuff, and watch the melee ensue. Alrighty, this is Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG. Every day I try to bring you 2 or 3 tips on how to make your games better, and hope you've been enjoying my videos. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. I am on Twitch, where I do most of my broadcasts, and of course on Twitch, if you follow the show, you get to keep a track of all the episodes, but if you want to subscribe, you don't have to watch any commercials. Now, generally, I try to keep my videos under half an hour to avoid those. It's weird how I do that. I would get paid for every commercial you watch, but I don't want you to have to watch any commercials if I can help it. I know they will peg one on at the end or whatever, but the idea is that I want to give you the maximum enjoyment out of your game system, and whether you play role-play games or not, I want you to really get a chance to play out there, because our world has become so chaotic as to be untenable. Anyway, I'm rambling again, so I'm going to go ahead and call it